Hey people, I'm going to consider this as sort of part two or a little bit of an expansion on the video I made about ghosting. I may repeat some of the things I said there, but I think it's very important. And I think I'm at a good vantage point to talk about this because I'm going through it right now. Um, often the sort of videos online, I mean, I don't do self-help videos, I don't do psychology videos, but a lot of them are kind of from experts or people who are kind of looking in, and often they make good points. I've just seen one, for example, on ghosting. I'll come back to by Dr. Tank Farm Day, and I thought he had some very interesting things to say. But from the point of view of the ghosters, he was actually addressing people who do this and how they need to introspect on why they do it. So yeah, people who have, let's say, an insight into psychology and so on, I think they can make very good points. But someone like myself who's actually going through this in the present can also share a particular perspective on it. So I'll just quick recap on the context to this. I want to be clear. Well, first of all, there is a lot of misunderstandings about ghosting out there, not least the term itself. According to the New York Times, it's defined as cutting off all communication with someone with no explanation. With no explanation is the big caveat. Okay. Um, I don't care for a lot of the editorial stances of the New York Times, but I have to say they're right about this. Um, with no explanation, that is the caveat. Because I see a lot of people via online comments making excuses for ghosting. Oh, but sometimes it's justified and X, Y, and Z. Right, I'll get into that in a second, but it's interesting. There is actually quite a lot of material on this subject on YouTube. There's a lot of videos out there. Um, and most of them are looking at what it is and why do people do it. And I'm pleased to say most of them take a critical stance. I haven't seen any one of these sort of self-help guides or anything like that make excuses for ghosting, not one. But there are people out there who make excuses for it, and there's a few attitudes I've seen because I've obviously been thinking a lot about the subject since I found out what the term actually means. Um, the term itself, I know a lot of words get brought into the English language, and some of them are contentious and divisive. But this one, I think it's a useful analogy because a ghost mythology and folklore is an entity, for want of a better term, a spirit, if you like, that of a deceased person that just disappears. Um, in fact, perhaps it's not the best term because a ghost actually appears. It's an apparition that appears. Whereas the whole point about someone ghosting is they don't appear, they disappear. So maybe we could come up with a better word for it. Um, And I'm always cautious with new words introduced to the English language because I think that some very contentious politicized terms. But I think if there's a valid basis for it, that's different. And I think there is a valid basis for this. I think it's a problem. My experience is not unique. So, Dr. Tank Farm Day was talking about how ghosters don't want to deal with the emotional complications of this, especially if the other person is sensitive. Because dealing with emotions in life isn't easy. If the other person's sensitive, they don't want to deal with their tears and their sensitivity. So maybe they think that if they reject someone, well, he or she is going to start crying. It's going to be awkward, and I don't know how to deal with that. But fundamentally, whatever way it is glossed over, ghosting is cowardly, as I said in the last video. Now, you might think I'm biased because I'm on the other side, but I've been in situations where I've had to reject people. I did not just say nothing. I did not walk away. I did not just ignore them and expect them to work it out for themselves. I was upfront with them. and it's not fun. No one likes to be rejected or to reject, and I've experienced both. So there was one young woman I got quite close to. I liked her, I respected her, and I still do. But I realized practically it wasn't going to work out. And at the time, I was getting closer. This was via online dating. So I was talking to different people, and they knew that. We both knew that, the young woman I'm talking about, because I told her. Um, and I actually rejected her in part because of the person who's now ghosting me. That's the irony of it. Now, I still think it wouldn't necessarily have worked out. There were practical issues, and there were some things, some positions she held I didn't really agree with in terms of how she approached things. But I did not ghost her. I did not just ignore her messages or say nothing or leave her in the dark. I said, basically, I appreciate your time, and I feel that you're a good and honest and sincere person. And I meant that. But I'm going to have to draw a line on this. I don't think it could go further. If you want to stay friends, I'm happy to stay friends, and we are still connected. And I meant that not as a sort of just something nice to say. I meant it. I'd be happy to be friends with her because I think she is a sincere person. And we had some good conversations, things that we're mutually interested in. But I didn't feel chemistry. I didn't feel anything there. So I took the decision I can't play games with her. I'm not going to waste her time leading her on, so I won't. I'll be upfront with her. It's not going to work out. That's what I said. That's how you do it. It's not fun, but I am not going to treat someone like that. Like, well, it's not working out. I'm not interested in her, so I'm just going to say nothing because it'll be awkward because I can't be bothered. So, let me address some of the excuses that people make. Or actually, let me put it another way. Let me consider if there are some valid reasons for ghosting people. Um, but first of all, let's be clear what ghosting is and what it isn't. Ghosting is not if you've rejected someone clearly and they won't take no for an answer. They can't say they're being ghosted because they know what the situation is. So ghosting is not not talking to someone. It's not talking to someone, not communicating with someone without explanation. If you've rejected them, you've given an explanation. They know what the situation is. Um, and it might come abruptly, in which case it will obviously be hard for them. But if it's there, it's there, and then it's up to them to deal with it. Now, if you've had a really happy relationship and you reject them out of the blue, obviously they're going to ask questions, they're going to be hurt, and you'd have to expect that. But again, at least you've done the right thing and been upfront with them. Whatever the reason is you've rejected them, at least you've done it. You've been upfront. Maybe it's that you've been seeing someone else and your conscience has got the better of you. By the way, I'm not playing holier than thou here. I'm not implying I'm perfect. But I have always, and I can say this, hand on heart, I can say this. I have always valued the importance of communication. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I have a perfect personality. But I do value the importance of communication because I think whatever complications there are, it's something I've always been quite um, keen on underlying with the other person. Um, so that's not ghosting. If you're upfront with someone, it's not ghosting. So people say, "Oh, but I rejected this guy. It's not ghosting." Well, yeah, it's not ghosting. But if you just say nothing and expect him to work it out or expect her to work it out, that's ridiculous. You can't expect the other person to be a mind reader. And it's cruel. It's very cruel to do that to someone. Now in my situation, what happened was I got close to this young woman on eHarmony, and Robert Kelly. You said, "Oh, forget it, she's not worth it." Um, you're right, but what you need to understand is this, the whole point about ghosting is that you don't know what's happening until a while. I know what's happening now because friends have sort of given their insight and have considered what's going on. But you can't even, you don't even know you're being ghosted until at least several weeks into it. Because, I mean, if someone, for example, sends a message and the other person doesn't reply for a day, um, unless it's a situation where they're talking every day, then, maybe that's being a bit paranoid or a bit overly sensitive, in which case maybe you just need to give the person time. But when it starts getting into weeks and you're ostensibly in a relationship with someone, um, then of course you're going to ask questions. Now, the video I've just watched, Dr. Tank Farm D, he made an interesting point that, you know, he was sort of drawing on the boy who cried wolf analogy. He didn't say that. I think that's what he was drawing on. If you get a reputation as a ghoster, if that gets out, no one's going to trust you because you're going to think, well, I better not become close to this person because they'll just vanish. Um, and it could actually be that the person is actually in a serious accident, but because they have a reputation as a ghoster, no one's going to care. So there could be a scenario where they're actually in serious trouble, but no one's going to follow up. No one's going to contact the police or their families or anything like that because they'll say, oh well, they they've vanished before and it was nothing. This is why communication is so important. Everyone needs time now and again. We all need space. And if you have a particularly, I'm no relationship guru, but I would suggest that if you have a particularly turbulent relationship, then you need space or you need to end it. But I just don't think there's any excuse for ghosting. Perhaps the only things that might be legitimate is if the person's in some accident and they really cannot speak because they're in a hospital bed, or if there's been some major technology issue, if their phone has been stolen. But even in that case, if they really valued a relationship, they would ask a friend to borrow their laptop or borrow their phone. They would find some way to communicate with a person. I believe that. So I don't even think a technical problem is an excuse. It might be for a while, for a day or two. If your computer's down, it's had some virus and it's down, and maybe you're getting a new phone. Okay, that's going to be difficult, but you could still find a way to communicate with a person. If you really cared about their feelings, you would find a way. You could call them on a public box. You could borrow a friend's phone. There's ways to do it. So I don't think that's an excuse. Family bereavement, and this one's quite manipulative because if someone has lost a family member, we want to be sensitive and we want to be understanding of that. But I do think there are some people out there who will use personal tragedy as a way to kind of as a cloak. Oh, I couldn't say anything because my family member died, and that's kind of manipulative because then it kind of makes the other person feel guilty. Oh well, that's a major thing. But even in that circumstance, I believe you can say something. You can say, "I've just got awful news. I need time to process this. I need to go to the funeral. I need to arrange a funeral." But if you're dating someone, if you've got a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and you care about that person. I'm not talking about some open relationship. I'm talking about something that's meaningful. If you really care about them and you've had a family tragedy, then surely you would tell them. I think there's no excuse for ghosting. None. The only thing that could maybe, I mentioned the example of being in hospital and being seriously sick. I suppose there is one other one, which is if the person is a violent, controlling person. I mentioned one person on one of the comments on that video I've just watched saying that they dealt with someone who had MPD, which I assume is narcissistic personality disorder. If you're dealing with someone who is a controlling individual, who's very manipulative, who will always twist your words and trap you into these sort of gaslighting situations, or something like that, here's the thing, everyone has a right to protect themselves. So I totally understand that. I'm sympathetic to that. But I still think you could find a way to reject them. And again, the problem there is if you tell people that, how do they know the other person is really a narcissist or controlling or violent? You know, I think you could still say, I need out of this. But that one I am a bit more sympathetic to because I appreciate that's a very different situation than the ghoster being selfish. Because if they feel, for example, telling the person that they're being rejected, there has been a few cases of someone rejecting the other person, being upfront, and then they end up getting basically killed. I mean, it sounds awful, but that has happened. So I get that you get possessive, controlling people. Um, but I don't think that is kind of the norm when it comes to ghosting. I think if my own example is anything to go by, then, and I've seen a lot of other people, just looking at internet comments, assuming that they're telling the truth, who've been through similar experiences to myself. Now, in my case, there was no red flags. We had no arguments. She said nothing that made me suspicious. There was no awkwardness between us. There was nothing. Nothing. She didn't reject me. She never said, I'm sorry, Nathan, this is not working out. In which case, it would have surprised me and I would have probably tried to persuade her to change her mind. But I'm not the sort of guy to push and push and push. If a woman, if someone says that they're rejecting you and they really insist on it, you have to respect their decision ultimately. It's hard, but you have to. But that didn't happen here. So the final thing I'll say is if you're ghosting someone because you think you're sparing their feelings, you're not. All you're doing is hurting them by putting them in a limbo, by not knowing what's going on. You might think, oh well, they should work it out by now. And maybe they have, but the onus is still on you to be responsible and mature enough to just tell them. That's the adult, considerable thing to do. Um, it's as simple as that. And if they are a controlling, violent person, you have a right to protect yourself. But actually, the irony of this is ghosters end up hurting themselves because A, no one will trust them, and B, it's not actually addressing the problem. In fact, if anything, if you're trying to get rid of the person because you don't know that you're tired of the relationship or something, it's better to give a clean break and reject them rather than give them all these questions by saying nothing because the chances are they'll message you and they'll try and work out what's going on. I mean, I've done that. I've messaged her several times, not recently because initially I did, because obviously I want to know what's going on. We were talking every day, then suddenly nothing. Of course I'm going to message her. You'll also make the other person, they won't think, oh, she or he is rejecting me. They'll think, has something happened? Has he or she got into an accident? Are they safe? Are they okay? So you end up just making things complicated. You might think it's an easy way out, but if you're any sort of decent person, you'll have a guilty conscience. If they are, like I say, a violent or abusive person, you've every right to protect yourself. But I think even in that situation, it's better to reject them because if they are a controlling person and you say nothing, it's likely to just, encourage their anger. Um, but and I appreciate that isn't easy. I appreciate that's a difficult one. But ghosting, I think, just because you can't be bothered to confront the situation, just because you're immature, there's no excuse. Okay, I'll wrap this up. I'll put a link to that video. Thanks for watching. And I hope people consider this. I hope if you are ghosting someone, you just do the right thing, contact them. If you felt they're not the right person, or you're seeing someone else, or the relationship isn't working out, I know it's not easy, but you have to tell them that's a decent thing to do.